The train's whistle shrieked across the Arkansas Valley as Zelda Harper gripped the handrail, her left ankle throbbing with such intensity that she could barely see straight through the pain. Fort Smith sprawled before her in the afternoon heat of June 1879, a collection of weathered buildings and dusty streets that looked nothing like the romantic frontier town she had imagined during the long journey from Boston. Her traveling dress, once a pristine cream color with delicate lace trim, now bore the dust and grime of 3 days on the rails. The corset beneath squeezed her ribs with each labored breath as she tried to steady herself on the platform. Her ankle had twisted badly that morning when the train lurched over a rough section of track, sending her tumbling between the narrow seats. The conductor had helped her up, his weathered face creasing with concern, but there was nothing to be done except wait until they reached Fort Smith. She had never met Quinton Steele in person. Their courtship had been conducted entirely through letters, arranged by her aunt, who knew his late mother from childhood. The arrangement seemed perfectly reasonable back in Boston, where her prospects had dwindled after her father's business collapsed, and her family's social standing crumbled like dry bread. At 22, she was considered past her prime by Boston standards, and the offer from a prosperous rancher in Arkansas Territory had seemed like divine providence. His letters had been thoughtful and articulate, speaking of wide open spaces, honest work, and a desire for companionship that resonated with her own loneliness. Now, standing on this platform with her ankle swollen inside her boot and no idea what her future husband actually looked like, Zelda felt the first real tendrils of fear creeping up her spine. The other passengers flowed around her like water around a stone, collecting their luggage and greeting waiting family members with joy and enthusiasm. She stood alone, trying to shift her weight to her good foot, wondering if she should attempt to sit on her trunk or if that would make her look even more pathetic. "Miss Harper." The voice came from her left, deep and steady as a river current. She turned, nearly losing her balance, and found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the very landscape around them. Quinton Steele stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the distance. Those eyes were a striking gray blue, like storm clouds over water, and they were currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His dark hair, shot through with premature silver at the temples despite his apparent age of around 27, curled slightly at the collar of his clean but worn shirt. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as he studied her. "Mr. Steele," she managed, attempting a curtsy and immediately regretting it as pain shot up her leg. She stumbled, and suddenly he was there, one strong arm around her waist, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Easy now," he said, his voice quiet and calm. "I saw you favoring that leg when you stepped off the train. What happened?" The concern in his tone was genuine, not the polite inquiry of a stranger but something warmer, more personal. It threw her off balance more than her injured ankle had. "The train lurched this morning," she explained, feeling her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I fell between the seats. I twisted my ankle rather badly, I am afraid. I apologize for my appearance. This is not how I wished to meet you." Quinton studied her face for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. She knew she was not a beauty in the classical sense, her features too strong, her figure too tall and angular. Her dark hair, nearly black, had come loose from its pins during the journey, and her hazel eyes must look enormous in her pale face. She probably looked half dead from exhaustion and pain. "I will carry you through every storm," Quinton said suddenly, and before she could process his words, he had swept her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Starting with this one," Zelda gasped, her hands instinctively gripping his shoulders. Through the fabric of his shirt, she could feel solid muscle and warmth. He smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat, completely different from the cologne-scented men of Boston society. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she could not tell if it was from shock, fear, or something else entirely. "Mr. Steele, please, I can manage," she protested weakly, though she made no real effort to escape his hold. The relief of being off her injured ankle was too immediate and too wonderful. "Quinton," he corrected, already striding toward a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. "If we are to be married, you should call me Quinton. And no, you cannot manage. That ankle needs tending, and the sooner we get you to the ranch, the sooner we can do something about it." He settled her on the wagon seat with surprising care, making sure she was comfortable before turning back to collect her trunk. Zelda watched him lift the heavy trunk as if it weighed nothing, his movements efficient and practiced. Other people on the platform watched too, she noticed, and most of them were smiling. A woman in a faded calico dress called out, "That is a fine way to greet your bride, Quinton Steele." He waved in acknowledgement but did not stop working. When he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Zelda found herself acutely aware of his presence. The wagon seat forced them close together, their shoulders nearly touching. She could feel the heat radiating from him in the warm afternoon air. "I have a doctor in mind for that ankle," Quinton said as he guided the horses away from the station. "Doc Matthews has a place about 2 miles past the ranch. He is good with injuries, patched me up more times than I can count. But first, I need to know if you are feeling faint. You are very pale." "I am just tired," Zelda admitted. "And the pain is quite intense, though I have been trying not to show it." He glanced at her and something softened in his expression. "You do not need to hide pain from me, Zelda. May I call you Zelda?" "Yes, of course." She found herself relaxing slightly despite everything. There was something reassuring about his straightforward manner, so different from the elaborate social games of Boston. "Good. Now, I know this is not how either of us imagined meeting. I am sorry your journey ended in injury. But I want you to know that I meant what I said back there. I will carry you through every storm. That is a promise." The sincerity in his voice made tears prick at her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "Not yet," he agreed. "But I know your letters. I know you are educated and thoughtful. I know you have a sense of humor, even in difficult circumstances. I know you were brave enough to travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger. That tells me plenty about your character." They left the town behind, following a dirt road that wound through increasingly wild country. The landscape was breathtaking in its raw beauty. Rolling hills covered in tall grass stretched in every direction, dotted with clusters of oak and hickory trees. In the distance, she could see the dark line of the Arkansas River snaking through the valley. The sky seemed impossibly vast compared to the narrow streets of Boston, a brilliant blue arch overhead with only a few wispy clouds. "It is beautiful," Zelda said softly, momentarily forgetting her pain in wonder. "It is," Quinton agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her rather than the landscape. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. He looked away first, clearing his throat. "The ranch is about an hour from town. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who has prepared a room for you. She is a good woman, came out here with her husband to work on the railroad. He died in an accident 5 years ago and she needed work. She has been running my household ever since." "You said in your letters that you raise cattle," Zelda said, wanting to keep the conversation going. His voice was soothing, and as long as they talked, she could focus on something other than the pain. Cattle and horses both. I have about 300 head of cattle right now, and a breeding program for working horses. The army buys from me regularly and private buyers too. It is good business, though the work is hard. He paused, then added carefully, I want to be honest with you about what life will be like. The ranch keeps me busy from dawn to well past dusk most days. I have 3 ranch hands who help with the daily work, good men all of them. But it is not an easy life, especially not for someone accustomed to city living. I am not afraid of hard work, Zelda said, lifting her chin. My father's business failed 2 years ago. I have spent the past 2 years working as a seamstress and helping my mother take in laundry. Boston was not the life of leisure you might imagine. Quinton's expression showed respect. I am sorry for your troubles, but I am glad you know what honest work looks like. Still, ranch life is different. We are miles from the nearest neighbor. Winters can be brutal, and summers are hot enough to cook eggs on the rocks. There are dangers too, rattlesnakes and the occasional mountain lion, though they generally avoid people. And then there are the human dangers. What do you mean? Zelda asked, her heart picking up speed. Cattle rustlers mostly. We have had some trouble the past few months with a gang operating in the area. They hit the Patterson place last month, made off with about 50 head. The law is stretched thin out here, so we ranchers mostly look after ourselves. He must have noticed her expression because he added quickly, I do not mean to frighten you. The ranch house is solid and I have good men watching the herds. You will be safe there, I promise you that. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady clip of the horse's hooves, and the whisper of wind through the grass. Zelda tried to process everything, her future unfolding in her mind like a map of unknown territory. She had known, abstractly, that frontier life would be different from Boston. But knowing something intellectually and facing the reality were 2 very different things. Her ankle throbbed with every bump in the road, sending waves of pain up her leg that made her dizzy. She must have made a sound because Quinton immediately looked at her, concern darkening his eyes. We are almost there, he said. Just hold on a little longer. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, and despite her pain, Zelda caught her breath. The house sat in a small valley, backed by a line of trees that must mark a creek or river. It was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure built from logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the surrounding area, barns and corrals and what looked like a bunkhouse. Horses grazed in a nearby pasture, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. It is beautiful, Zelda breathed. It is home, Quinton said simply. My father built the original cabin 30 years ago, back when this was still dangerous country. The Comanche and Kiowa were active then, before the treaties pushed them further west. He started with nothing but his hands and his determination. I have been building on what he started, trying to make it something lasting. What happened to your parents? Zelda asked softly. Mother died 2 years ago, fever took her. Father went 6 months later. Doc Matthews said it was his heart, but I think it was more than that. He could not live without her. They had been together for 35 years. His voice was rough with old grief. That is why I started writing to your aunt, looking for a wife. This ranch needs life in it again. It needs children and laughter and purpose beyond just surviving. Before Zelda could respond, the front door of the house opened, and a small, sturdy woman emerged. She appeared to be in her late 40s, with graying black hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the weathered face of someone who had lived through hardship and come out stronger. She wore a simple dress with an apron over it, and her dark eyes went immediately to Zelda. Mr. Quinton, you did not say she was injured, the woman exclaimed, hurrying toward the wagon. Her English was accented but clear. Mrs. Chen, meet Zelda Harper. Zelda, this is Mrs. Chen, the woman who actually runs this place. Quinton jumped down from the wagon and came around to Zelda's side. She injured her ankle on the train. We will need to send for Doc Matthews. I will send Thomas right away, Mrs. Chen said, already turning back toward the house. You bring her inside. Put her in the guest room. I will get water heating for a bath and make willow bark tea for the pain. Quinton lifted Zelda from the wagon seat with the same ease as before. This time, she did not protest, too tired and sore to maintain any pretense of independence. He carried her across the porch and into the house, and Zelda had a brief impression of a spacious main room with comfortable furniture and windows that let in streams of golden light. He climbed the stairs without apparent effort and carried her into a bedroom that was simply but comfortably furnished. A large bed with a colorful quilt dominated the space, and there was a dresser, a wardrobe, and a chair by the window. He set her down carefully on the bed, and she could not quite suppress a sigh of relief at being horizontal. I will get your trunk, Quinton said. Mrs. Chen will help you get settled. The doc should be here within the hour. Thank you, Zelda said, looking up at him, for everything. I know this is not what you expected. He surprised her by smiling, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. Life on the frontier rarely meets expectations, Zelda. You learn to adapt. Rest now. We will have time to talk after Doc Matthews has seen to you. After he left, Mrs. Chen appeared with a cup of tea that tasted bitter but immediately began to dull the worst of the pain. She helped Zelda out of her traveling dress and into a nightgown from her trunk, her movements gentle and efficient. You are wondering about me, Mrs. Chen said as she worked. It was not a question. Mr. Steele mentioned your husband worked on the railroad, Zelda offered. My husband was a good man. He came to this country for opportunity, and he worked himself to death for it. Mr. Quinton found me after, gave me work and dignity when others would not. She met Zelda's eyes. He is a good man too, that one, fair and honest. He will treat you right. How long have you worked for him? Zelda asked. 5 years now. I have seen him through his parents' deaths, through hard winters and cattle thieves and all manner of trouble. He never complains, that man. He just does what needs doing. But he has been lonely. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. This house has been too quiet. I am glad he is bringing a wife home, even if the circumstances are not ideal. A young man appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. He looked to be about 20, with sun-bleached hair and a lean, wiry build. Begging your pardon, madam, he said to Zelda, his face reddening. Boss asked me to fetch Doc Matthews. I will ride hard, have him here quick as I can. Thank you, Zelda said, touched by his obvious concern. After he left, Mrs. Chen brought warm water and cloths, carefully removing Zelda's boot from her injured ankle. The joint was swollen to twice its normal size and already turning purple with bruising. Even the gentlest touch made Zelda gasp. Not good, Mrs. Chen murmured. But not broken, I think. Doc Matthews will know better. True to the young man's word, the doctor arrived within the hour. He was a gray-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Zelda's ankle thoroughly, manipulating it in ways that made her see stars despite the willow bark tea. Badly sprained, but not broken, he announced finally. You will need to stay off it for at least 2 weeks, longer if you want it to heal properly. I will wrap it tight and you will need to keep it elevated as much as possible. Mrs. Chen can make cold compresses to help with the swelling. 2 weeks, Zelda repeated, dismayed. But the wedding? The wedding can wait, Quinton said from the doorway. Zelda had not heard him come upstairs. Your health is more important than any ceremony." Doc Matthews finished wrapping her ankle in tight bandages, then prepared a stronger pain remedy from his bag. "This will help you sleep," he told her. "Use it tonight and tomorrow if the pain is bad. After that, the willow bark tea should be sufficient." After the doctor left, Quinton returned with a tray of food, simple but substantial: thick slices of bread, stew that smelled wonderful, and cool water. He set it on the bed beside her. "Mrs. Chen said you need to eat, keep your strength up," he explained. "I will leave you to rest, but if you need anything at all, just call out. I will hear you." "Where will you sleep?" Zelda asked, then felt her face heat at the forward question, but Quinton did not seem bothered. "In my room down the hall. We will share that room after we are married, but for now you have your own space. No rush, Zelda, we will do this right." After he left, Zelda ate mechanically, her mind whirling. The medicine Doc Matthews had given her was making her drowsy, but her thoughts refused to settle. She had expected to arrive, marry quickly, and begin learning her new role as a rancher's wife. Instead, she was an invalid, imposing on Quinton's hospitality before they were even properly engaged. The medicine won out over her anxious thoughts, pulling her down into deep, dreamless sleep. The next few days established a pattern. Zelda would wake to find Mrs. Chen bringing breakfast and fresh cold compresses for her ankle. The swelling began to gradually decrease, though the bruising spread in spectacular shades of purple, green, and yellow. Quinton would visit several times a day, always knocking before entering, always proper and respectful. He would sit in the chair by the window and talk to her about the ranch, about his plans for the future, about life in Arkansas. She learned that he had built most of the outbuildings himself, working alongside his ranch hands. She learned that he could track a stray calf across miles of open range, that he could deliver a breech foal and mend a broken fence and shoot a rifle with deadly accuracy. But she also learned that he read poetry, that his mother had taught him to appreciate music, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. On the fourth day, Mrs. Chen helped her into a dressing gown and supported her as she hobbled to the chair by the window. The change of position was wonderful after days in bed. From the window, she could see the ranch spread out below. Quinton was in the nearest corral, working with a young horse. She watched, fascinated, as he moved with patient confidence, gentling the animal with quiet words and steady hands. "He is good with frightened things," Mrs. Chen observed, coming to stand beside her with fresh bandages. "Animals, people, does not matter. He has a gift for showing them they are safe." "He has been very kind," Zelda said softly. "Kind is not the word," Mrs. Chen said. "He looks at you like you are precious. I have known him 5 years, and I have never seen him look at anyone that way." Zelda felt her heart skip. "We barely know each other." "Knowing someone and seeing someone are different things," Mrs. Chen said wisely. "He sees you, Miss Zelda. He sees your strength, even when you are weak. He sees your grace, even when you are embarrassed. That is a gift, to be seen like that." That evening, Quinton brought dinner himself, 2 plates loaded with Mrs. Chen's excellent cooking. He set them on the small table by the window, then helped Zelda hobble over to join him. "I thought you might enjoy some company," he said, "if you are not too tired." "I would like that very much," Zelda admitted. "I am going stir-crazy in this room, beautiful as it is." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Then Quinton said, "I have been thinking about the wedding. When you are ready, when your ankle is healed, we could have a small ceremony here at the ranch. The preacher from Fort Smith makes rounds to the outlying areas once a month. He will be through in about 3 weeks, or if you prefer, we could wait longer, give you more time to be sure this is what you want." Zelda set down her fork and looked at him directly. "Do you have doubts, Quinton?" "No," he said immediately. "No doubts, but I would understand if you did. You have barely seen the ranch, barely gotten to know me. You are injured and far from home, and you might be feeling trapped." "I am not trapped," Zelda said firmly. "I made this choice with full knowledge of what I was doing. I came here to marry you, and that has not changed. But I need to know, do you want to marry me? Truly? Not out of obligation or because the arrangements were made, but because you actually want to build a life with me." Quinton reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, completely engulfing hers. "I want to marry you, Zelda. I have wanted it since your third letter, when you wrote about watching the sunrise from your window and thinking about all the people waking up to the same sun, all of us connected by something larger than ourselves. That is when I knew you were someone who could see beauty even in hard times, someone who understood that life was bigger than just our small struggles." Tears filled Zelda's eyes. "I remember writing that letter. It was after a particularly difficult day. My mother had been crying about our lost fortune, and my sisters were fighting over a dress. I felt so alone, so lost. Writing to you gave me hope that there was something better waiting." "There is something better waiting," Quinton said intently. "Right here. We can build it together, Zelda. I know I am not a smooth-talking gentleman from Boston. I know my hands are rough and my manners are simple. But I will never lie to you, never betray you, and never stop working to give you a good life." "I do not want a smooth-talking gentleman," Zelda said through her tears. "I want someone real, someone honest. I want exactly what you are offering." Quinton stood and came around the table. He knelt beside her chair, still holding her hand, and looked up at her with those storm cloud eyes. "Then marry me, Zelda Harper. Not because of our arrangement, not because of circumstances, but because we choose each other. Marry me and let me spend my life proving that you made the right choice." "Yes," Zelda whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Quinton Steele." He stood and pulled her carefully to her feet, mindful of her ankle. Then, with infinite gentleness, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was nothing like the aggressive, demanding kisses she had read about in novels. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, a beginning rather than a conquest. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. 3 weeks, Quinton said hoarsely. 3 weeks and you will be my wife." Those 3 weeks passed in a blur of healing and learning. As Zelda's ankle improved, she began to venture further from her room. Quinton carried her downstairs in the mornings and back up at night, refusing to let her risk the stairs alone. During the days, she sat in the main room and learned from Mrs. Chen how the household ran. The ranch house, she discovered, was far more sophisticated than she had expected. There was a modern cook stove in the kitchen, a luxury in frontier country. The main room had built-in bookshelves crammed with volumes ranging from agricultural manuals to collections of poetry. Quinton's mother had been an educated woman, Mrs. Chen explained, and she had insisted on bringing culture to the wilderness. Zelda also met the ranch hands properly. Thomas, the young man who had fetched the doctor, was shy but friendly. He was the son of a neighboring rancher and had come to work for Quinton to learn the cattle business. Miguel was older, a Mexican man with a weathered face and a ready smile. He had worked for Quinton's father before him and knew every inch of the ranch. The third hand was a former buffalo hunter named Jack, a taciturn man in his 50s who spoke little but watched everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. All 3 men treated Zelda with respect that bordered on reverence, and she slowly understood that they saw her as the missing piece that would make their small community complete. They wanted Quinton to be happy, and they had decided she was the key to that happiness. As her ankle healed, Zelda began to help Mrs. Chen with light tasks around the house. She could sew better than the housekeeper, and she took over mending the men's work clothes, transforming torn shirts and old socks into serviceable garments again. She helped with cooking, learning to make the simple, hearty meals that fueled hard labor. And she watched Quinton whenever she could, learning his rhythms and moods. She learned that he rose before dawn and worked until after dark most days. She learned that he was fiercely protective of his animals and his people, but quick to laugh at himself. She learned that he had a temper, though he kept it tightly leashed, and that he hated injustice with a passion that sometimes surprised her with its intensity. One afternoon, about 10 days after her arrival, Quinton came in with a face like a thundercloud. A neighboring rancher had stopped by, and from the bits of conversation Zelda overheard, there had been another raid by the cattle thieves. "They hit the Morrison place last night," Quinton told her as they sat on the porch that evening. Zelda was finally able to walk short distances with only a slight limp. "Made off with nearly 100 head. Morrison is beside himself. Those cattle represented most of his wealth. If he cannot recover them, he will lose his ranch." "Can the law do nothing?" Zelda asked. "The law is one marshal covering 3 counties," Quinton said bitterly. "A good man, but what can one man do?" "The ranchers have been talking about forming a vigilance committee, tracking the thieves ourselves." "That sounds dangerous," Zelda said, fear clutching at her heart. "It is dangerous doing nothing," Quinton countered. "If we let them keep operating, none of us will be safe." "But," he added, taking her hand, "I promised to carry you through every storm, and I meant it. I will not take foolish risks. Any action we take will be planned and careful." "Do you have to go?" Zelda asked quietly. "Not until after the wedding," Quinton said firmly. "Nothing is more important than that. After we are married, once you are settled and comfortable here, then I will see what needs to be done." The wedding day arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Zelda woke early, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Mrs. Chen helped her dress in the gown she had brought from Boston, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It was the finest thing she owned, saved for this exact purpose. The preacher arrived at noon, a jovial man with a booming voice and genuine warmth. The ceremony took place on the front porch, with Mrs. Chen, Thomas, Miguel, and Jack serving as witnesses. A few neighboring ranchers had been invited, and they stood in a respectful semicircle, hats in hands. Quinton wore his best clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt with a vest, his hair carefully combed back. When Zelda stepped out onto the porch, supported by Mrs. Chen, his face transformed. The guarded, careful expression he usually wore melted away, replaced by undisguised joy and wonder. The ceremony itself was brief. They repeated their vows in steady voices, Quinton sliding a simple gold band onto Zelda's finger. It had been his grandmother's ring, he had told her the night before, brought from Ohio when his grandparents had first ventured west. The metal was worn smooth with age and represented a legacy of love and endurance. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and gave Quinton permission to kiss his bride, the kiss was deeper than their first, full of promise and belonging. The witnesses erupted in cheers and applause, and Zelda found herself laughing and crying at the same time. Mrs. Chen had prepared a wedding feast that seemed miraculous given the limitations of frontier cooking. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the kitchen garden, and even a cake made with precious sugar and dried fruit. They ate at tables set up in the yard, the neighbors sharing stories and jokes, the ranch hands relaxed and smiling. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the neighbors departed with hearty congratulations and well wishes. Mrs. Chen diplomatically announced that she was retiring to her small cabin behind the main house for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy. The ranch hands retreated to the bunkhouse, and suddenly Quinton and Zelda were alone. Quinton took her hand and led her into the house, lighting lamps as they went. They climbed the stairs together, Zelda's ankle strong enough now to manage without assistance. He led her to his room, larger than the guest room and clearly masculine in its simple furnishings. A large bed dominated the space, covered in a quilt of dark blues and browns. "Are you frightened?" Quinton asked softly, closing the door behind them. "A little," Zelda admitted, "but not of you." He crossed to her and began carefully unpinning her hair, letting the dark mass fall around her shoulders. "We will take this slow," he murmured. "I will not rush you, Zelda. We have all the time in the world." He was true to his word, patient and gentle as he introduced her to the intimacy of marriage. His touch was reverent, almost worshipful, as if he could not quite believe she was real. And Zelda found herself responding with a passion that surprised her, all her fears melting away in the heat of their connection. This was right, she thought. This was what she had been waiting for without knowing it. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Quinton's hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said quietly. "I thought I had resigned myself to a practical marriage, a partnership without passion. But this, what I feel for you, it is so much more than that." "I feel it too," Zelda whispered. "When I left Boston, I thought I was running toward security. I did not realize I was running toward home. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment and discovery." Zelda threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. She learned to manage the household, to plan meals around what was available and in season. She learned to preserve food for the winter, putting up jars of vegetables and fruits. She learned to handle the chickens that provided eggs, to milk the cow that Mrs. Chen kept for fresh dairy, to churn butter and make cheese. Quinton insisted on teaching her to ride, starting her on a gentle mare named Daisy. Her first attempts were comical and frustrating in equal measure, but Quinton was endlessly patient. He walked beside her horse for the first week, one hand always ready to steady her. Gradually, she gained confidence, learning to move with the horse's rhythm, to communicate through subtle pressures and shifts in weight. By late August, she was competent enough to ride out with Quinton when he checked the herds. Those rides became the highlight of her days, hours spent in his company exploring the vast acreage of the ranch. He showed her every spring and creek, every hidden valley and high ridge. He taught her to read the signs of weather and season, to spot tracks and identify animals from a distance. It was on one of these rides that they first encountered real trouble. They had ridden to the eastern pasture to check on a group of cattle that had been grazing there. As they topped a rise, Quinton suddenly tensed, his hand going to the rifle he always carried in a saddle scabbard. "What is it?" Zelda asked, following his gaze. "There," he said quietly, pointing. "See where the grass is trampled? That is not cattle wandering, that is a large group being driven, rustlers." Her heart began to pound. "How old are the tracks? Recent, maybe last night." His jaw tightened. "I need to count the herd, see how many we lost." It took less than an hour to confirm the bad news. 20 head were missing, driven off during the night. Quinton sat his horse in grim silence, staring at the tracks that led north into rougher country. "We need to get you back to the house," he said finally. "Then I will get the men together and see if we can track them." "Is it safe to follow?" Zelda asked worriedly. "Probably not," Quinton admitted, "but I cannot just let them steal from us with impunity. If they think we are easy targets, they will keep coming back until we have nothing left." Back at the ranch, Quinton quickly assembled Thomas, Miguel, and Jack. They loaded rifles and supplies, preparing for what might be several days of tracking. Zelda watched, fear gnawing at her stomach, but she kept her concerns to herself. This was part of life here, she reminded herself. Quinton had warned her about the dangers. "I will be back as soon as I can," Quinton promised, pulling her close for a fierce kiss. "Mrs. Chen is here, and I am leaving orders for the neighbors to check in. You will be safe." "I am not worried about me," Zelda said, gripping his shirt. "Come back to me, Quinton. We have barely begun our life together." "I will always come back to you," he said softly. "That is a promise." She watched them ride north, 4 men against unknown odds, and felt fear like a living thing coiling in her chest. Mrs. Chen came to stand beside her, her face expressionless but her eyes worried. "Men must do what they think is right," Mrs. Chen said, "even when it makes the women who love them crazy with fear. Come, we will keep busy. Busy hands help anxious hearts." The 3 days Quinton was gone were the longest of Zelda's life. She threw herself into work, cleaning the house from top to bottom, baking enough bread to feed an army, mending every piece of cloth in sight. At night, she lay alone in the bed she now shared with her husband, and prayed to a God she was not sure was listening. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Mrs. Chen called out from the porch. Zelda ran outside to see 4 riders approaching. Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. They were all there, all 4 men returning safely. As they drew closer, she could see Quinton's face was drawn with exhaustion, his clothes dusty and torn. But he was smiling, and when he dismounted, she ran to him despite Mrs. Chen's calls to be careful. "We got them," Quinton said, catching her in his arms. "We tracked them to an old line shack about 30 miles north. They had gathered stolen cattle from several ranches, at least 200 head. We sent Miguel back to Fort Smith for the marshal, then watched the shack. When the marshal arrived yesterday with a posse, we moved in. Got them without firing a shot, recovered all the cattle." "You are safe," Zelda breathed, running her hands over him as if to confirm he was real and whole. "That is all that matters." That night, after he had bathed and eaten and finally rested, Quinton held her close in their bed and told her the whole story. The careful tracking, the long hours of watching and waiting, the moment when the marshal's posse had surrounded the rustlers and called for their surrender. 3 men had been arrested, all part of a larger gang that had been operating across the territory. "It is over," Quinton said. "Not just for us, but for all the ranchers around here. The marshal thinks this will break up the gang, send the rest scattering. We can breathe easier now." "I was terrified," Zelda admitted. "I kept thinking about you out there, facing who knows what kind of danger, and I realized that I could not bear to lose you. These past few weeks, I have fallen completely in love with you, Quinton Steele." He pulled back to look at her in the lamplight. "You love me, desperately," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "Completely. Forever." His own eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you too, Zelda. I have loved you since you stepped off that train limping and still managed to hold your head high. You are the strongest, most incredible woman I have ever met." Their lovemaking that night was different, charged with the intensity of nearly losing each other, of finally speaking the words that had been building between them. Afterward, Zelda lay with her head on Quinton's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt perfectly, completely content. Autumn came to the Arkansas hills in a blaze of color. The oaks and hickories turned shades of red and gold, and the air took on a crisp edge that made the endless blue sky seem even more vast. Zelda worked alongside Mrs. Chen to prepare the household for winter, preserving the last of the garden produce, stocking the pantry with dried goods, making sure there was enough firewood cut and stacked. She also began to feel the first subtle changes in her body that made her suspect she might be carrying Quinton's child. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, wanting to be certain before she told him. But by late October, there was no doubt. She was pregnant. She chose to tell him on a Sunday evening after a quiet dinner. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air. Quinton had his arm around her, her head resting on his shoulder, and the moment felt perfect. "Quinton," she said quietly, "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" he asked, his voice relaxed and content. "I am going to have a baby, your baby, our baby." He went completely still. For a moment she worried about his reaction, but then he turned to her with wonder written all over his face. "A baby, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." "Mrs. Chen agrees with my assessment. She thinks the baby will come in early May." Quinton let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the bunkhouse. He stood, pulling her up with him, and swung her in a careful circle. "We are having a baby. Zelda, this is the most wonderful news." "I cannot believe it." "I am glad you are happy," she said, laughing at his exuberance. "I was not sure how you would react." "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, setting her down gently and then kneeling to place his hand over her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Tears streamed down Zelda's face. This man, this good, strong, wonderful man, was her husband and the father of her child. Sometimes she still could not quite believe her good fortune. Doc Matthews confirmed the pregnancy a week later, pronouncing Zelda healthy and strong. He advised continued moderate activity, but warned her to be careful as she got further along. Quinton took his advice seriously, becoming almost comically protective. He insisted on carrying her up and down the stairs again, worried about her falling. He tried to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup. "Quinton, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Zelda finally protested after he attempted to carry her from the house to the barn. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am perfectly capable of walking." "But what if you fall?" he argued. "What if you hurt yourself or the baby?" "Then I will be careful," she said firmly. "But I will not spend the next 6 months sitting on a cushion like some delicate flower. I am a rancher's wife, and there is work to be done." They compromised. Zelda continued her regular activities, but agreed to avoid anything too strenuous. She stopped riding, much as it pained her, and let Mrs. Chen handle the heavier household tasks. But she still managed the accounts, still supervised the running of the household, still found ways to be useful. Winter came hard and fast that year. By December, snow lay thick on the ground and the temperatures dropped well below freezing. The ranch hands spent long hours making sure the cattle had access to water and shelter. Quinton and his men broke ice on the water troughs twice a day, hauled hay to the animals, and checked constantly for strays that might have wandered away from the herd. Zelda spent those long winter days inside with Mrs. Chen, sewing baby clothes and preparing the small room next to the master bedroom as a nursery. They whitewashed the walls and hung cheerful curtains. Quinton built a cradle from oak, carving it with patient care during the evenings. Zelda made quilts and gowns, embroidering each piece with love. On Christmas Day, Quinton surprised her with a rocking chair he had commissioned from a craftsman in Fort Smith. It was beautiful, made from polished walnut with smooth rockers and a high back. He placed it by the window in the nursery, and Zelda sat in it, rocking gently, imagining the hours she would spend there nursing and comforting their child. "This is perfect," she said, reaching for his hand. "Everything is perfect." "A year ago I was alone and afraid in Boston, wondering what would become of me. Now look where I am. I have a home, a husband I love more than life, and a baby coming. It seems like a dream." If it is a dream, I never want to wake up, Quinton said, kneeling beside the chair and placing his hand over her swelling stomach. The baby had started moving recently, flutters that were becoming stronger kicks. As if responding to his father's touch, the baby moved and Quinton's face lit up with wonder. "Did you feel that?" "I feel it all the time now," Zelda said, laughing. "Your child is very active." "My child," Quinton repeated, his voice full of awe. "Our child. Zelda, I need you to know something. I have never been happier than I am right now in this moment. You have given me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to hope for. I love you more than I can express." "I love you too," Zelda whispered, tears streaming down her face. "So very much." Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing muddy ground that gradually dried and turned green with new grass. The cattle, thin from the hard winter, began to fatten again. Birds returned, filling the air with song. And Zelda's pregnancy advanced, her belly swelling until she could barely see her feet. By April, she was uncomfortable and restless, eager to meet the child she had been carrying for so long. Mrs. Chen had attended many births during her years in the territory, and she assured Zelda that everything was progressing normally. They had sent word to Doc Matthews, who promised to come as soon as he received word that Zelda's labor had begun. The baby chose to arrive on a beautiful May morning when the air was fresh and sweet with the scent of blooming wildflowers. Zelda's labor began just before dawn, waking her with cramping pains that quickly intensified. She woke Quinton, who immediately went into a barely controlled panic. "I will get Mrs. Chen and send for the doctor," he said, pulling on his clothes with shaking hands. "You stay here, do not move, just breathe." Despite the pain, Zelda had to laugh at his expression. "Quinton, we have hours yet. First babies take their time. But yes, please fetch Mrs. Chen." What followed was a long, difficult day. Labor was every bit as hard as the women had warned her, waves of pain that seemed endless. Mrs. Chen coached her through it, offering water and encouragement. Doc Matthews arrived around noon and examined her, pronouncing everything normal but warning that she still had a long way to go. Quinton was a wreck. He paced outside the bedroom door for hours, driving Mrs. Chen to distraction until she finally ordered him to go do ranch work and stop making everyone nervous. He reluctantly left but was back within an hour, unable to stay away. As evening approached, the contractions became unbearable. Zelda gripped Mrs. Chen's hand and pushed when told to push, breathed when told to breathe, and somewhere in the blur of pain and effort, she heard a baby's cry. "It is a boy," Doc Matthews announced triumphantly. "A healthy, strong boy." Quinton burst through the door, having clearly been listening just outside. His face was pale, but his eyes shone with tears as the doctor placed the squalling, red-faced infant in Zelda's arms. "A son," Quinton breathed, sitting on the edge of the bed and staring at the baby in wonder. "We have a son, Zelda." The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still the unfocused blue of all newborns. His tiny fists waved in the air, and his cries were impressively loud for someone so small. Zelda felt a wave of love so powerful it nearly stopped her heart. "He is perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Quinton Harper Steele, honoring both sides of his family. In the days that followed, Zelda discovered the particular exhaustion that comes with a newborn. Quinton demanded to be fed every few hours, day and night. He cried when he was hungry, when he was wet, when he was tired but could not settle, and sometimes seemingly for no reason at all. But he also had moments of perfect contentment, his tiny face relaxing into sleep, his small hand curling around her finger with surprising strength. Quinton was a devoted father from the start. He walked the floor with the baby when Zelda was too tired, changed diapers without complaint, and spent hours simply watching his son sleep. He built a sling so Zelda could carry the baby while working around the house, and he adjusted his schedule so he could help more during the demanding early weeks. By summer, they had settled into a routine. Quinton was becoming more alert, his eyes focusing and following movement. He smiled for the first time at 6 weeks, a gummy grin that made both parents melt. He began to grab at things, exploring the world with his hands and mouth. One warm July evening, Zelda sat in the rocking chair nursing the baby while Quinton leaned against the doorframe, watching. The window was open, letting in the evening breeze and the sounds of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. "You ever think about how different our lives would be if you had not come west?" Quinton asked quietly. "Sometimes," Zelda admitted. "I would probably be in Boston still, working as a seamstress, growing old alone. I certainly never would have had this." She looked down at the baby in her arms. "This perfect, wonderful life." "I think about the moment you stepped off that train," Quinton said. "You were limping in pain, probably terrified even though you were too brave to show it. And I looked at you and knew instantly that you were going to change my life. I just did not realize how completely." "I was terrified," Zelda confessed. "I thought you would take one look at me, injured and disheveled, and regret ever sending for me. But you said you would carry me through every storm. And you have, Quinton. Through every difficulty, every challenge, you have been there. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more." Quinton crossed to her and knelt beside the rocking chair, his arm around her shoulders. Together they looked at their son, who had fallen asleep at the breast, milk-drunk and peaceful. "This is just the beginning," Quinton said softly. "We have our whole lives ahead of us, more children if we are blessed, watching them grow, building something that will last long after we are gone. Growing old together on this land we love." "It sounds perfect," Zelda whispered, and it was. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. Another son arrived 2 years later, a sturdy boy they named Zachary. He was followed 3 years later by a daughter, Clara, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray-blue eyes. The ranch prospered under Quinton's careful management, growing from 300 head of cattle to nearly 1,000. They built a new barn and expanded the house, adding rooms for the growing family. There were hard times too. A drought one year that nearly broke them before the rains finally came. A prairie fire that burned a quarter of their grazing land before they managed to stop it. The usual illnesses and injuries that came with frontier life. But through everything, they faced the challenges together, their love growing stronger and deeper with each passing year. The children grew. Quinton proved to be a natural horseman like his father, spending every moment he could in the saddle. Zachary was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for working with his hands. He could fix anything, build anything, solve any mechanical problem. Clara was fierce and independent, refusing to be left behind when her brothers rode out, insisting on learning everything they learned. When Quinton was 12, Quinton began teaching him the cattle business in earnest, taking him on the yearly roundups, showing him how to manage the books and plan for the future. When Zachary was 10, he built his own forge and began making tools and horseshoes, proud as could be when his father used his creations around the ranch. Clara learned to ride and rope as well as her brothers, but she also loved books and learning, devouring everything in her father's library and begging for more. Zelda watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Where had the years gone? It seemed like only yesterday that she had stepped off that train, limping and uncertain. Now she was in her 40s, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines on her face earned through years of laughter and sun. Quinton's hair was more silver than dark now, and his face was deeply weathered. But when he looked at her, she still saw the same love and wonder that had been there from the beginning. One evening, when the children were in bed and they sat together on the porch watching the stars, Quinton took her hand. "Do you remember the night before our wedding, when I asked if you were sure you wanted to marry me?" "Of course I remember," Zelda said. "I told you I wanted someone real and honest." "You got more than you bargained for," Quinton said with a smile. 3 children, a working ranch, all the joys and headaches that come with this life." "I got exactly what I needed," Zelda corrected gently. "A home, a family, a love that has sustained me through everything. You kept your promise, Quinton. You have carried me through every storm." "And you have carried me right back," Quinton said. "Do you know that? On the days when I think about giving up, when the work seems too hard and the problems too big, I think about you. About the way you stepped off that train limping but held your head high. About the way you tackled ranch life without complaint. About the way you have made this house a home and raised our children to be good, strong people. You are my rock, Zelda. You always have been." Tears ran down her face. Even after all these years, he could still move her to tears with his words. "We have built something good here, haven't we?" "The best," Quinton agreed. He stood and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Dance with me." "There is no music," Zelda protested, but she was already moving with him, swaying in the starlight. "There is always music when I am with you," Quinton murmured against her hair. They danced on the porch of the ranch house they had built together, under the vast Arkansas sky, and Zelda thought about the journey that had brought her here. The train ride from Boston, the twisted ankle, the moment when a stern-faced rancher had promised to carry her through every storm. She had been so afraid, so uncertain. She could never have imagined the life that was waiting for her. Their children grew to adulthood. Quinton married a neighboring rancher's daughter and took over much of the day-to-day management of the ranch, building his own house on the property. Zachary opened a smithy in Fort Smith, though he came home often to help with ranch work. Clara shocked everyone by going east to attend a women's college, but she came back after graduation, determined to become a teacher in the growing town of Fort Smith. Quinton and Zelda became grandparents, delighting in the parade of grandchildren that began to fill the house again. Quinton and his wife had 4 children in quick succession. Zachary married later and had 2 sons. Even Clara eventually married a schoolteacher from Little Rock and had 3 daughters. The ranch continued to prosper. The railroad came through closer to their property, making it easier to ship cattle to market. Fort Smith grew from a rough frontier town into a proper city. The wild, dangerous Arkansas territory of Zelda's arrival became a settled, civilized place. But the ranch remained, a constant in the changing world. On a warm spring evening in 1920, Quinton and Zelda sat on their porch as they had so many times before. They were both in their 60s now, their hair white, their movements slower. But Quinton still carried firewood for his wife, and Zelda still made his favorite meals. The love between them had only deepened with time, weathered and tested by 4 decades together. "You have any regrets?" Quinton asked suddenly. "About leaving Boston, about the life you might have had." Zelda looked at her husband, at the face she knew better than her own. She thought about the scared young woman who had limped off a train 41 years ago. She thought about all the moments since then, the births and deaths, the triumphs and struggles, the ordinary days that had woven together into a life. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This has been the greatest adventure I could have imagined. You gave me that, Quinton. You and this wild, beautiful place. "You gave me more," Quinton said softly. "You gave me a reason to build something lasting. Children and grandchildren who will carry on after we are gone. Love that has made every single day worthwhile. You stepped off that train limping, and I thought I was going to rescue you. But you rescued me, Zelda. You gave purpose to my life." "We rescued each other," Zelda said, taking his hand. "That is what love is, I think. Not one person carrying the other, but both of you walking together through whatever comes." As the sun set over the Arkansas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat together in companionable silence. The ranch spread out below them, the house full of family, the land they had worked and loved for decades stretching to the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear grandchildren laughing, the sound carried on the evening breeze. This was what they had built together, Zelda thought. Not just a ranch or a business, but a legacy of love and hard work. Their children and grandchildren would carry it forward, adding their own chapters to the story. But it had all started with a young woman limping off a train and a rancher who had promised to carry her through every storm. He had kept that promise, she thought, squeezing his hand. Through 41 years of storms and sunshine, of hardship and joy, of ordinary days and extraordinary moments, he had been there. And she had been there for him, equally strong, equally committed. The years continued to pass, gentler now but still full of purpose. Quinton and Zelda gradually passed more responsibilities to their children, content to advise rather than manage. They spent their days working in the garden, visiting with grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company after a lifetime of hard work. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Quinton, now managing the ranch full-time, roasted a steer for the occasion. Tables were set up in the yard and the celebration went on all day. Neighbors and friends came from miles around to honor the couple who had become fixtures in the community. As Quinton and Zelda stood together, his arm around her waist, she looked at the crowd of people they had touched and influenced. Their children, successful and happy. Grandchildren growing strong and confident. Friends and neighbors who had been helped over the years in countless ways. This was the real legacy, she thought. Not land or cattle or money, but the connections they had built, the love they had shared, the example they had set. 50 years, Quinton murmured in her ear. "And I would marry you again tomorrow if given the choice." "Only tomorrow," Zelda teased. "Not today. Today I am already married to you," he pointed out with a grin. "Best decision I ever made." They lived into their 70s, a remarkable age for the time and place. Quinton remained active almost to the end, still riding out to check the herds well into his 73rd year. Zelda tended her garden and her grandchildren with equal devotion, always ready with a story or a hug or a slice of fresh baked pie. When Quinton finally passed peacefully in his sleep at 74, Zelda grieved deeply, but without despair. They had been blessed with over 50 years together, years full of love and purpose. She missed him terribly, but she also knew that the love they had shared continued in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that bore his stamp in every fence post and building, in the community they had helped build. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by family, before joining her husband in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. They were buried side by side, their headstones simple but bearing inscriptions chosen by their children. His read, "He carried his loved ones through every storm." Hers read, "She made every place she stood into home." The ranch continued, passed down through the generations. Quinton's grandson eventually took it over, then his great-grandsons. The main house was preserved and expanded, with photos of Quinton and Zelda holding places of honor in the main room. Their story became family legend, told to each new generation as an example of courage, commitment, and enduring love. The rocking chair Quinton had given Zelda remained in what had been their bedroom, used by generation after generation of mothers to nurse and comfort babies. The cradle he had carved was carefully maintained, cradling new babies even 100 years after its creation. These physical objects carried the spirit of the couple who had started it all, reminders of where the family had come from and what values they held dear. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the tall grass and the sun set over the Arkansas hills in a blaze of gold, it was possible to imagine a young woman stepping off a train, limping but proud. It was possible to imagine a rancher, stern-faced but kind, making a promise that would shape the rest of their lives. It was possible to feel the echo of the love they had built, strong enough to last through generations, solid as the land itself. From an arrangement born of necessity and distance, they had created something magnificent. From a twisted ankle and a moment of kindness, they had built a dynasty. From two lonely people seeking companionship, they had found a love story for the ages. The land remained as it always had and always would. The ranch continued its cycles of seasons and years. But the spirit of Quinton and Zelda Steele lived on, in the values they had instilled, in the family they had created, in the example they had set. They had promised to carry each other through every storm, and they had kept that promise through a lifetime of storms and sunshine, hardship and joy. It was, their descendants agreed, the greatest love story the Arkansas frontier had ever known. And it had all started with a bride who stepped off a train limping and a rancher who had promised to carry her through every storm. A promise kept, a love honored, a legacy that would endure as long as the hills themselves.